Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexstead and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by D365 UG, Britta and I talk about things that are repetitive to do manually, but the XrmToolBox does quite well. The user group for Dynamics 365 and CRM, D365 UG, CRM UG, is powered by users for users and specializes in the delivery of member-driven education, networking, and events to help you maximize your current Microsoft Dynamics investment. D365 UG is the world's most influential user group community of Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM users and partners. Across the globe, members share a common goal of maximizing and advancing the performance of Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM, so that individuals and companies can improve operations, overcome obstacles, and exceed goals. We thank CrmUG for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back in front of the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
It's been too long.
Too long. Yeah, gotta love fall travel season.
That's right. And conference season. Listen to the podcast episodes about conference season to get ready for next year's conferences. They'll be here before you know it.
It takes all year to prepare. There's so much to do. So what I really want to talk about today, I just came from CrmUG Summit, and we talk about XrmToolBox in almost every session. And I want to take one step back and talk about what it is in case our listeners are not already using it, and share a little about why it took me so long to adapt it. Because it probably took me a lot longer than it should have to use it as an admin. We had a super strict no-code policy, absolutely no code. And that also meant an aversion to using any free tools or anything I could download. At the time, it was Codeplex, and very wary. Eventually adopted like one tiny solution off of Codeplex. But even then, that was kind of scary to us. Mostly because the thought of, we don't understand code. So the thought of using someone else's code, how do you know that it's not malicious?
Sure.
Because that's something, if you don't have a developer on staff, hard to know. And we didn't use code, didn't want to do something to break the system. It was just a timid situation for me. And I still tell people to be careful with using code that isn't yours. And I would always say be really careful permanently relying on something you didn't pay for, because someone doesn't have an obligation to keep it up. So if a core piece of my implementation is going to rely on some code, I want it to be code I either paid for it to be written, or I bought it from a third party who I have a maintenance relationship with, and they're going to help me through upgrades, and they're going to upgrade things in their code and fix things over time. I want that. I'm not going to put a core to the way the system functions in the hands of something I got free online with someone I have no relationship with. That said, looking back now, there's so many things I wasted so much time on because I didn't have the XrmToolBox.
And I mean, so much just over time with the adoption of open source more and more, and the concept of community that sits behind these things. I mean, the reality is the XrmToolBox, the first time I heard about it, it was a link that I got from a buddy that had it in a blog that was talking about something. But now, literally, if you go to docs.microsoft.com and look at some of the customization stuff, it talks about community tools, including XrmToolBox. So like the legitimacy of what it is, source code being reviewable and available out on GitHub to be able to see that it's safe. I mean, you don't have to be a developer necessarily to know and be able to see some of the community support that's there, but definitely for the XrmToolBox itself is the application that runs a lot of these little plugins. So if you're not a developer yourself, or you're looking at some of these different plugins and it doesn't have a lot of ratings and doesn't have a lot of feedback, you may need to be wary of that and just check in with somebody, check with the community, see what's out there. I mean, that's not that unreasonable as you're considering that.
And that's the nice thing about community tools. A lot of these tools, you can find webinars and YouTube videos, and people love to talk about how they've used these tools and how they've saved them so much time. And you can even see what I like. You can see who made it. And a lot of times, those are prominent MVPs in the community, or they're up and coming people who become an MVP very soon. In part because of their work with the XrmToolBox. So it does have that credibility piece. It's not just free code you found on a blog, but it's usually pretty easy to validate the legitimacy of it. And even if you're not a developer, there's a lot of credibility behind the XrmToolBox. So
yeah,
really
well, and for the ones certainly that I'm willing to chat about, they're ones that are always doing things in a supported way, and they're not leaving artifacts behind inside of your environment. Oftentimes, it's the plugin points at your environment to do something for you, but it's not trying to change core behavior of the application or trick the system into doing something it's not supposed to. It's just, in many of these cases, taking something that, you could do, but is a real hassle otherwise, and giving you an easier, more user-friendly way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a big difference between using a power tool once because you may need it. And there's a lot of client projects where I just need one tool from the XrmToolBox one time in the whole deployment. And then life goes on without it. And that I feel a lot safer on a free tool doing that instead of having it be reliant. If I never, I can use bulk workflow execution, which we're going to talk about today, one time. And if I, in the future, don't want to use it or for some reason it's not available, I can do life as I know it without it. I'm not dependent on it. But man, has it saved my weekend so many times.
So let's talk about a few of them.
Yeah.
There's one that comes to mind for me because I used it for a solution that I was building recently. And the challenge that I was running into was I had a bunch of custom entities, and when I looked at them in the solution and in the application, they all had that same little out-of-the-box icon for a custom entity, same thing that you see everywhere. Not very helpful from a user experience standpoint as you're looking at it, but changing icons in the application is a cumbersome process because there are multiple types of icons depending on what interface people are going through to look at it, whether it's in a side menu, whether it's in a ribbon, whether it's the kind of hero picture at the top of a record that you have open, or it's something you're looking at in the unified interface. There are different icons for that, and each of them have to be kind of hand attached to an individual entity.
And that can be really overwhelming too if you're like me. And I've never picked out a paint color for any paint ever put on a wall. I've always just brought a friend with me to Home Depot and they pick it out and that's what I buy. I do not have that thing that I know you have because you have this web design background. So you actually, those kinds of things make sense to your brain. I like data. So there is not a right answer for which icon is the right icon.
Sure.
Luckily, we don't have to do it alone, so people like me we don't have to become like web designers to do icons.
And in the world of the XrmToolBox, we of course have the Iconator plugin to be able to make the process of updating icons much easier. So if you're that person who is going to paint one paint color and then repaint over the other, or use one icon and update that with another, Iconator is going to make that a heck of a lot simpler for you to do that. So for those who aren't familiar, when you are doing the icon updates, or if that's something you've seen out there but you weren't quite sure what it's going to take to be able to make those updates, whether you're using Iconator or not, you need to identify the actual icons that you're going to be using. So there are three key sizes, well, kind of four, but key three sizes that you're going to be looking at. One of them is 16 by 16 pixels. One of them is 32 by 32, and one of them is a vector icon, or SVG, that are going to be your three icon types that you have for it. And what you want for any of the entities that you're going to have, you want to have these icons roughly resemble each other. So you don't want to have something radically different from one size to the other, because it is kind of that visual cue for somebody, kind of what that record type is supposed to be. And if they're looking at it in a list on the classic interface, or if they're looking at it from the unified interface, you want it to look roughly the same, if not exactly the same. The other thing with those icons is you want to make sure that you have a transparent background for them. So a lot of the rookie mistake is to have kind of a white background because it looks really nice in your paint program. But then as soon as you upload that icon, it's not going to look quite as nice because then it plasters a white background behind everything. So you want to have a transparent background for that. And one thing, if you've never worked with a vector graphic before, you don't modify them using the same type of traditional paint program that you would for, say, the 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 PNG files that you would use for the others. You're going to use something such as I'll have to edit something in here as I come up with it. But you'll have to use an application that can support using vector graphics, and that is a different type of application than your traditional image processing application like Paint or Paint.net is one that I used quite a bit. So one other size icon that you will sometimes see that's not widely talked about, but it is the icons that are used for an area or kind of grouping within the navigation menu.
It's like the sales area or the
sales
settings area.
Exactly. So those have their own special size. It's an 85 pixel wide by 71 pixel high. The image isn't quite centered. It's about 80% of the total size. I actually put together a video on this a while back on how to build out those icons. There's some transparency of the image, the icon itself that you want to have in there to be consistent with the design standards of Dynamics. So that's the funky, weird cousin that's out there.
So I'm sure we can put that in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Happy to link to that. So those are the different icon types that you have. And then without Iconator, you would then need to go into your Web Resource Manager, Web Resources area, upload each of those individual ones, give it names and all the details that are along with those, then go into your entity customization and set each of the icons appropriately with the entity. Awful lot of clicks, awful lot of typing, places to go wrong. It's easy to forget what you call different icons.
Oh, okay.
And that's where Iconator comes to the rescue, because it gives you this nice visual interface to be able to, first off, upload icons. So you can, pick them from a folder, and it will break them into your 16 by 16, 32 by 32, and vector formats that you have. And then from there, you can use an entity list on the left-hand side to be able to click, here's the entity, here's the icon, I want to make that association. And you set up what each of those associations are, then you push a publish button, and it goes and changes all of them for you right from that interface. So everything from uploading the icon to giving it the name, making sure it's published, and doing the actual association, all done through that interface.
And if I am artistically challenged, I can just bring in one icon and it will turn it into a vector for me and do the sizes? You're going to,
that's a great question. So for that vector format, the beauty of a vector icon is that it's defined in a way that it's going to scale to whatever size it needs to be inside of the application. So if it's super duper teeny tiny, it will still look like it's supposed to. But if you go as big as a high definition monitor and want it to look good, it will still look good without any of those funky edges. And that's all in the way it's defined. Unfortunately, what you're as a quote unquote non-artistic person, what you're probably doing is you're looking to some sort of resource where you can download those pre-made vector graphics on their own. There are various icon packages out there where you can get thousands of them for a small fee. There are some where they require either a donation or an attribution if you're going to use those. And there are a lot of different sites to be able to get those. So for vector graphics, that's even where I go for a lot of those. I picked up a package of those, paid the fee to be able to use those. It was a small one. But that way I have this library of different vector graphics to be able to choose from. And when we look at the 16 by 16 and 32 by 32, those are classic interface for Dynamics. Mm-hmm. When we start looking at the unified interface for Dynamics, that's where the vector graphics are coming in. And as we kind of look forward to things, I suspect that there will be less need to be thinking about the traditional pixel-based graphic formats.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Suspicion, though, nothing official here.
It does seem just kind of the direction things are going in life in general.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where UIs are going. all that. Cool. Very cool. So it's not that can save you a lot of time. No,
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And then those packs too. Definitely help people like me who I can pick from a pack. I can do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm curious, what's a XrmToolBox plugin that is saving you time?
Well, I've talked about it before, but I cannot live without the bulk workflow execution because that is my power tool. Workflows are how I solve problems. So if there's data we need to fix, if there's something we need to configure or calculate, or there's just a lot of times that I'm bringing that in to spot treat an issue. So things come in a migration and you're missing 3 fields, or there's something new you add to a process, and all of a sudden now every account in the system has to have that new set of data that matters to the business that didn't matter, 3 months ago. So none of it's populated. And so the pain and suffering is pretty simple to understand on that one. It's simply running an on-demand workflow, 250 records at a time, all weekend with your dog in your lap watching TV. And as much fun as that is, this tool is just amazing because all you have to do is pull up a view that has everything in it. You can set the batch size and things like that. So it'll actually... What I also like is it will give you a real record count instead of just giving you the plus, 5,000 plus records. So it's nice to know how many you really are dealing with, and then it will run nice batch sizes for you. You can even play with that if you're really worried about performance.
Yeah.
Or if you do have to, heaven forbid, run this during the day while there's users in there, something like that. It's not going to bring the server to its knees. It's going to pace itself. And it's just been amazing to me. At one time, I think I got through 60,000 records in like an hour and a half.
Oh, wow.
And by in an hour and a half, I mean, I set it up, I hit go, I did other things you're supposed to do on a Saturday that you enjoy in your life, and then came back. And I was not sitting there clicking. So that's the one that I wish, knowing how much time I spend as a system admin, saying, okay, yep, we can accomplish that thing. I just need a weekend. And then I just be sitting there clicking forever. Sometimes I have like 2 laptops, so I could have them racing each other. So it's just so great. That I couldn't live without that one. Now that I have it, I really like a lot. Save you a lot of time.
So when you're doing that, is it typically a workflow that you've set up specifically for this one-off kind of operation, or are you ever doing this as like a regular maintenance type of thing where you kind of have that, you maybe leave it unpublished and then publish it for a while and then unpublish it again? What's that usually like for you?
You could use it for that. I've only ever used it to spot treat something. Okay. So usually it's data related. It's something we need to do where even just a bulk edit is not going to fix it. Maybe there's some decision tree needed to decide what data to populate on given records. So I've only ever used it in that context. If you had a workflow you ran quarterly, for example, maybe you had something for reporting and it wasn't worth writing something to schedule that work to happen, you definitely could use it for that. It's whenever you just need to do something really en masse.
And how about, I just think of for that type of thing, and I know this is off topic from the XrmToolBox, but I mean, it's what you're using it for, right? Like, are you ever doing anything to like audit that, like kind of storing away what it had been before in case you ever need to go back to something? Or okay.
What I really like to do, it's harder to do if you're going to do like 100,000 records because it's hard to get a good export. You got to do some magic to get that. Excel caps us at 10,000. So unless you hack it, you're only going to get
for that.
Yeah. There's a plugin for everything. But on your own, you're only going to get whatever 10,000 records it picks. And I haven't even figured out exactly. It must be sorting, whatever it's sorted on or whatever. But I do, whenever I'm doing big processes, I do like to take a data dump out of what I'm meddling with, just so I know. So in case I have to go back and fix something, or in case I have to go back and answer questions, I have the ability to do that.
Got it.
But that is harder to do when you have a huge load like that. And it's a little less scary when you're creating brand new fields and you're bringing data into fields that never had them before. When you're replacing data, that's a little scarier, and you want a little more of an ability to backtrack. I don't use auditing as we know it, though, for that. That's just a painful process. You have to actually open each record and go look at it, see what changed. Auditing 60,000 records that way is just... pain and suffering in here.
There's another topic for another day.
Yeah, another topic for another day.
Capability.
Yeah, exactly.
So one last topic on this, and I'll stop grilling you on the topic. But when you're doing those types of kind of spot treatments, as you call them. I like that terminology. How about for other workflows that you'd normally have running in the system? Are there considerations that you have or best practices you have around like what you leave enabled when you're going to do that bulk update?
Great question. So something to keep in mind, if this triggers, let's say me running this workflow is going to update 70,000 contact records. I do need to have an awareness of what other workflows are going to run on the update of a contact record, specifically on the update of the field, because while my bulk workflow execution is going to pace itself and not do any harm in the workflow I chose to run, if I inadvertently trigger 70,000 other workflows or 140,000 other workflows to run because of what I just did, that is not being paced through the bulk workflow execution. So, another great reason to have a sense of what's going on in your system and make sure you're not triggering things. Cascade rules, like we've talked about on the show before, that's another thing to keep in mind. Just what is going to trigger when. But that's something if I was going to do, I'd want to have a sense of what's going on in an automated sense in my system, so I'm not inadvertently triggering things. And that's really a mix of documentation and just knowledge of what's going on. Which we've covered before.
Yeah.
So do you have any other ones that you would like to save you a lot of time?
I think there are so many other ones that we should end up doing another episode about this.
Oh,
Continue the conversation another time.
Yes. And while we're at it, I'd love to ask the listeners if there's any that they love out of the XrmToolBox. So we can include those. So hit us up on Twitter or on the website with your submissions for what you love about the XrmToolBox and what saves you a lot of time.
All right. So before we sign off this time, Britta, I think we were going to do a call to the community here.
Yes. So you've probably heard about this crazy thing called UCI or the Unified Client or the Unified Interface or all these things that are all scary, or wondered what those hubs are that you're now seeing in your apps if you're already online. And so we are preparing to do an episode on that, but we know you have questions. It's what we're hearing all the time. So please submit your questions.
Yes. Bring those questions in and hit us up on Twitter, hit us up through the website. If it is about the newfangled looking interface for Dynamics 365 / PowerApps, now is your chance to get those questions in. We'll hit them in an upcoming episode. You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.